April was a bit of a chaotic month for me. Hello guys! Welcome to another video. My name is Stephanie and today's video is going to be an April wrap-up. Today's beverage of choice is hot, but is Eternal Summer by TWG. I am not being sponsored, by the way. This is a decaffeinated rooibos. I already had a giant coffee and I'm kind of jittery from it, so it's gonna be a fun video. Yeah, I read 8 books. I am gonna be talking about 9 because I finished one book on the last day of March that didn't make it into my last video. Almost all of them except for one was either audio or ebook because in April we were moving and my books were in a box for at least 3 weeks. I will be giving star ratings for a lot of these books, but I just want to note that they don't really act as the best way to summarize my feelings about the book that I read because I have a lot of nuanced thoughts and feelings and it's just not super ideal, but I do rate them because I don't have any better methods. The first book I read this month was Strange the Dreamer. Actually, this is the one that I finished on the end of March. Then I read the follow-up, Muse of Nightmares. This is a duology by Laini Taylor. In it, we follow Laszlo Strange, who is a war orphan and a librarian, along with a man called the Godslayer and a cast of other really great characters on our way to a mythic city called Weep. Weep has actually lost its name, and so Weep is like the stand-in that they use for it. And they are trying to remove this kind of floating palace that's casting a shadow, literal and figurative, over the entire city of Weep. And it's sort of a reminder of the horrible things that happened when it was inhabited. This is such an amazing series. Laini Taylor does an incredible job writing a prose that is both beautiful but not too heavy and creating a very fairy tale magical sense of the world without losing distance to the characters and their internal thoughts and feelings. What she does with magic just floors me every time, and this is really a book for dreamers and for book lovers, but do check the trigger warnings. Sexual violence is a huge theme, although it is not on the page, and I think this book does a really great job handling it really sensitively and showing how it is used as a tool of power. I gave both of these books 5 stars. Very easily. They're amazing books. After that, I was ready to binge Laini Taylor, so I actually picked up a book I'd read a few years ago, Daughter of Smoke and Bone. When I first read this book, I gave it 3 stars because something happens in the middle of the book that really changes the narrative, and I was not on board for that when I was first reading it. I had gotten really invested in the story that I thought I was gonna get, and then when she subverted it, I was not impressed. This book follows a devil's human daughter who is also his assistant as well as an art student in Prague. She assists him with collecting teeth to do his mysterious magic. It has the same magical, mythical kind of feeling as Strange the Dreamer does, and kind of basically centers around this mythical celestial war between angels and demons, but I have never seen demons done like this. My second time around, it was a 5-star read. Having read, I think, a lot more YA fiction, I enjoyed and appreciated how she subverted my expectations in the beginning of the book, and now I think I'm probably at some point going to end up rereading the whole series. Laini Taylor is just a queen. After that, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. This one I listened to on audiobook, and I mentioned it on my spring TBR, so I'm not going to talk about it too extensively. It is about a woman named Emily Wilde who is on an academic research trip in Scandinavia to create an encyclopedia of fairies along with the help of her colleague Wendell Brambleby. This book started off really strong for me. It's supposed to be like a cozy fantasy, and I definitely got that vibe. The characters were super distinct and interesting, and I loved the more traditional approach to the fae. It was definitely a lot more vibes and a lot more character driven than I think maybe I was looking for. So there were some parts that felt a little bit meandering for me, and to be honest, I really didn't like the whole 3rd act. It really sagged, and I found it a little bit boring. So I'm not sure if cozy fantasy is just not for me, or if I just wasn't in the right mindset for the book, but I felt like I needed sort of higher stakes to be a little bit more engaged. Although I did enjoy this book, I gave it 3.5 stars and wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to the right person. After that, I went for something totally different, which is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. This book is written by an American Egyptian woman who grew up in Dubai and North America. And I think that's really important context because the book centers around a character with a similar experience. Neither of the two characters have a name, and it is written from a first-person point of view. So like the author, the main woman moves back to Cairo when she's an adult, her homeland post-Arab Spring. And when she's there, she has a lot of like culture shock, and she begins dating a guy who is a local. And it is really important to note that this is dual POV. I did not realize this for like the first few chapters, and I was like quite confused and like unsure what was going on, because I think in the beginning, the dual POV, they're both written from the first person perspective, and they are distinct, but they become increasingly distinct as the time goes on. I have a lot of really complicated feelings about this book, and I think I could probably fill an entire video full of them, but I'm gonna keep this one short and spoiler free. This is one of those books that examines broader issues in society and politics through the relationship of two individuals. It deals with fetishization of the homeland, there's a bit of metafiction, and power and privilege, and American ignorance or maybe naivety. This one didn't put me in a reading slump, but I did need to take a couple of days to digest and really think about all of my thoughts and my feelings. I think it touches on a lot of really interesting topics and deals with it in a really nuanced and unexpected way. And I gave this 5 stars, and I think you should definitely read it. After that, I read The Storyteller by Dave Grohl. This is a memoir of a band member of Nirvana and the frontman of Foo Fighters, as well as like a lot of other really influential bands in the grunge and punk sort of genres. This one was so good. He did not use a ghostwriter, and you could really hear his voice come through, and is actually a very good writer. He said a lot about letting his freak flag fly, and that got a little bit excessive for me, but I think that must be his motto or something. I listened to this on audio, and I definitely recommend in that format, because he is narrating, and it is just 100 times better in that way, and he adds a lot of like other music and like textural sounds to it. There were a few spots that I thought could use a little bit more depth or organization, but in general this is a really great memoir and kind of nostalgic for me, because these are the bands that I grew up listening to and still listen to today. I had to keep pausing and replaying the good parts for my husband, which totally bemused him, because I think the most edgy kind of music he listens to is the Backstreet Boys, but he was a good sport. I gave it 4.5 stars just for the sheer joy that it brought me. After that, I read Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire. This book was really disappointing for me. I picked it up when I was looking for fantasy that you could read in a day. This one came up on a lot of lists, and I thought, I haven't read this one, so maybe I should prioritize it sometime. And oh my god, it felt like it was even longer to read than Priory of the Orange Tree, even though it was only like 150 pages. I feel like maybe I missed something. I don't really know why this book was so hyped on YouTube, but it was really a slog for me to read. The series is about how difficult it is for the children who have gone through magical portals into other lands and then had to return and reintegrate into society. It follows a girl named Nancy who has returned from the land of the dead and doesn't really want to be part of the normal, ordinary world anymore. So she's sent to Eleanor West's home for wayward children to sort of reintegrate into society. While she's there, of course, she meets other children and teens who are in sort of the same situation as her and trying to adapt to normal life. And there is a little bit of like a murder mystery element to it. So that sounds amazing, right? And conceptually, I love this story, but in the execution, it just was a total miss for me. I rated this 2.5 stars. There were some hints towards the end that made me think that maybe the follow-up books will work a little bit better for me. But this is a problem that I regularly have with Shauna McGuire's writing. I had this similar sort of experience with Middle Game. I loved the concept. I did not really enjoy the execution. Although I'm absolutely obsessed with her other book, Into the Drowning Deep, under her name Mira Grant, which is her Killer Mermaids book. So I don't know, maybe I'll give it another shot. You guys tell me what your thoughts are, if I should continue, but I don't think I'm going to be making it a priority for now. I had another kind of disappointing book this month, and that was a nonfiction called This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. This book made me so mad, and maybe not for the reasons that you might think. The research itself is great, and I appreciate how the author doesn't push the reader into either taking birth control or not taking it. But maybe we'll back up and I'll explain. This is written by Sarah E. Hill, who is an evolutionary psychologist. And I'll come back to that in a minute because that area of psychology is kind of related to some of my criticisms of this book. But number one, I have a problem with the tone in which this is written. She really has this angle of like, hey girlfriend, let's talk about your uterus and like how your brain responds to the hormones that are going off like rockets all over your body. And I just found it a little bit obnoxious. Like, I came to the book for information and not really to feel like the author is trying to sit down with a glass of wine and watch Sex and the City with me. So that might be a personal preference, but I didn't really enjoy that aspect of how the research was sort of framed. My greatest criticism and the greatest weakness of this book is that it is ridiculously cishet. And historically, this is a criticism of evolutionary psychology, that, you know, we are all created to bang it out and basically make babies so that the species can survive. But I think that it can and has been a little bit more nuanced. So it can be very deterministic and narrow. And I just found it very disappointing that the author chose to stay down that route when there is research that includes LGBTQ experiences and issues. The author is also clearly aware of this issue in her book because she mentions it in the introduction very briefly. And I just don't think that that's really sufficient because she then proceeds to ignore it for the rest of the book. Okay, and so this is also a bit of a limitation within research. We don't have as much research about LGBTQ experiences and needs, but for me that is not a reason to not include what there actually is. And this is especially considering the amount of speculation that she is comfortable engaging with throughout the book, which is also a bit of a criticism for me and made me a little bit skeptical or uncomfortable. I don't know if she thought that she was making her argument more streamlined and easier to understand, but actually I think this is a clear limitation and within the information that this book communicates. Ignoring it doesn't make your argument or the information that you present stronger, it weakens it. So I rated this one 2.5 stars. This is where I have a hard time with the stars because I want people to be aware and access the actually interesting and important research that is communicated in this book, but the way it's communicated and the exclusion of non-cis het people is extremely problematic for me. And finally, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree. Since I did a whole reading vlog on this book, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but this is a feminist retelling of St. George and the Dragon. It does a lot of really amazing world building and subverts a lot of traditional fantasy tropes in a very subtle and very elegant way. I do think this is one of the best sapphic or high fantasy retellings, and I'm looking forward to the prequel. I gave this book 4 stars. So those are all the books that I read in April. It had some highs and it had some lows. If you've read any of them, I would love to chat in the comments. And so far, May is looking pretty good. I'm gonna do a little bit of a bookshelf tour for you guys. And later at the end of this month, I'm going to be going to Yogyakarta. And then I have a book that's written by a local Indonesian author that I'm going to be reading as I travel through that. And I'm going to hopefully do a vlog for you guys to join me. But we'll see what we can do. Hopefully this month I'm also going to be reading a lot more in paper, physical books that are on my TBR. But until next time, guys, bye.